Hello. This is Irish whiskey.
Irish.
All right, so God, I'm huge.
You're
Let me.
You're huge. Is
turn,
that what
let me
you
turn
just
this.
said?
Turn this. So Ben will be here at some point tonight.
yes.
Until that time, it's Emyris and myself. We're going to talk a little bit about. Actually, I posted a topic. I wanted to talk about the game tonight, which was a 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons game. Dungeons and Dragons in game. This is called Gaming Without Combat. That's what I wanted to talk about. So, the idea of when you're playing a tabletop role-playing game, such as D&D, most of the time it's about combat. There's a lot of RP and such, but really, the game mechanics start when the DM, the Dungeon Master, says, roll initiative, and everybody knows, oh shit, you roll that die 20, now you're in rounds, and you start using your character's abilities, which are almost always based around the idea of being in combat. But a lot of games, such as DreadLore, there's no initiative order, and there's no, like, there are rounds, but the game, you're using your characters when you're role-playing. So it's not just about combat. Regardless, I want to talk a little bit about today's game, which was technically in D&D 5th edition. Why don't you introduce yourself?
So I am Emyris. In the game, my name is Heather. And while you do say that it is a D&D game, you do use a lot of DreadLore elements in it.
I do.
Which is pretty awesome. I think that helps with the role play and the I play World of Warcraft, so I will use the word lore building quite a bit. And today in particular, I feel like we really hit that high point of unprompted role play, I would say. It was 5-6 hours of us talking nonstop in character, making plans that maybe failed. I'm still a little salty over that, but it was a really good game, and it was very much roleplay focused rather than combat focused. We did, fight some baddies, but that wasn't the focus.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah.
So, Emyris has been playing. You've been playing video games for a while.
15 years.
Yeah, a long time.
Yeah.
But tabletop role-playing games.
Not quite a year, I would say. May, I think, is when.
Yeah, we started this game. We call it Richmond Fae. Mm-hmm. Actually, my buddy, or our collective mutual buddy, Eric, Chuck Salmon, as you have seen him on several of the DreadLore videos. If you haven't, check out Imperial Sins. It's one of the campaigns that I've run, as well as on Something Bunkum. He's all over that. Anyway, he started this game in 5th edition called Richmond Fae, and it's all about Fae creatures. Anyway, I took it over, and through the pandemic, we've been playing it remotely, and then sometimes in person and that kind of thing. Anyway, so that's been about almost a year. Mm-hmm. The game's been going on.
Yeah, I started a little late.
Yeah, I think the game started St. Paddy's Day. That's what he ran it for. At any rate, yeah. So we run it on Sundays right before the stream, which is why sometimes the stream is late.
It's for the game.
It's for the game. It's for the game. And today, so what I've been doing, especially with regardless of the system, is that I've realized as a game master that a lot of players, when they start out, or even intermediate players, when they start out and they sit at the table, they're looking for a dungeon crawl. Now, they may not say that. A lot of times they don't. A lot of times they're like, no, it's all about the role play. It's about that role play. But in reality, the kind of expectation is that at some point, roll initiative, you get attacked, your characters do their hero thing. You know, because when people think about RPGs, like tabletop RPGs, what do they think of? Like Critical Role, these kinds of things. And D&D is just pervasive. It's all over the place, and it's a tactical, strategic game. That's what it's all about.
True, and the online game in particular really hones in on the dungeon crawl side of it, if you will.
Yeah, Diablo is a dungeon. You know, yeah, there's story elements and cutscenes, but for the most part,
it's combat.
Yeah, it's combat. Even RTS is real-time strategies. The combat with cutscenes. And so that's kind of the feeling. You know, people coming from video games, which are combat. You come from, Legend of Zelda, any of those kinds of games. It's combat with cutscenes.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's because of D&D. I think D&D predated all of that. Actually, I know it predated all of that. Regardless, for a long time, I sort of, as a game master or storyteller, moved against that. And I really wanted to have sessions that were all about your character playing your character with the other players, and that's where you get your XP.
Right. It's not that you're invested in the mechanics, it's you're invested in what you are capable of doing with your character and your teammates.
Right.
Yeah.
And what is the story you're telling? But I noticed, I felt like I was beating my head against the wall a lot of times, because one of two things would happen. Either one, people would just be bored because they want to hit stuff and get treasure. Which is cool. It's just, kind of gets boring after a while.
Right.
Or, or the equivalent in Vampire would be, yeah, this is great RP. When do I get to betray someone and eat their soul? They either want to, hit stuff, or they'd sit there and be like, okay, well, my guy or my girl is so badass because they can roll high. It became this sort of like sandboxy world where the game didn't really have a story. It was well, what are we doing? It's really just session to session, and we're going down the stairs, and we don't like that guy, and we do like that guy, and everyone has their own thing, and there's really no, focus.
Yeah, it's just mechanic driven.
Yeah. And so what I realized was, that's the beauty of a dungeon. They don't literally have to be in a dungeon, but their minds are in a dungeon.
Yeah.
Right?
It's that dungeon outline of how things are expected to work.
And saying, okay, so you go into the town, which is the dungeon, or you go into, the astral plane.
The forest, whatever.
The forest,
yeah.
Which is the dungeon, right? And so there's that mentality of, I'm going to go from room to room, and I have a purpose. We're going to go find something, or find our way out of Mirkwood, or find the secret lich head, or whatever it is. And I noticed, this has been within the last maybe 4 or 5 months of me running games. The moment I made that shift of how I've run games, even without telling people, they suddenly, after the game, say, oh yeah, that was awesome.
True.
And I really learned something. Dungeon crawls are incredibly useful. But you don't have to have combat to have fun.
Yeah. There's a lot of other things that can be done in a dungeon other than fighting things. Especially, even if you approach it from a mechanical standpoint or a strategic standpoint. And I feel like we've been really starting to get into the planning and the I can't think of the right word, but strategy. Yes, strategy of, well, this could be a potential trap. There could be potential foes. What are we going to do to plan for that possibility? And
which can be a derailing. A lot of times,
true.
with a game like Shadowrun, which is essentially Cyberpunk 2077, is that what it's called?
I think so.
2077?
Don't quote me on that. I'm not confident.
Shadowrun is an old game, from the 80s or maybe 90s.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's all about planning. And what eventually occurs is you plan for 3 sessions. And then when you actually get to the actual, heist or whatever, it's kind of just mechanical and boring, right? So
it's like setting up your dominoes and just...
Yeah, and that's the thing is like, this game, it has not been that way. When they're planning, they're doing it in character. They're actually narratively planning. They're not, okay, you're the rogues of this, you're the warriors of this. No. The rogue
goes and does the rogue stuff.
And is playing the rogue. So the rogue's like, oh yeah, I'll look at, for instance, one of the players today, Drizzle. He gets this, he's handed this silver dagger. And it's got like ghost writing on it. And it's, completely made of silver. And his rival in game, who's another player, is a rogue type, but doesn't actually can't appraise anything. And so Drizzle looks at the thing and he's like, so storyteller, what is it? And I'm like, oh, it's magic weapon, this and this and this. So he turns back to Chris, who's the other guy, and he's like, oh yeah, this is nothing. Maybe it's worth a few silver. So, it's all in character.
Yeah.
And that was most of the game, which was, even during combat, they're sitting there doing that.
Yeah. Very true. Like, the rogues will go do the rogue stuff. Like, Chris and I, what is his name? Dav.
His character name is Dav.
His character name is Dav. We were planning, traps with some of the existing traps that the DM had made for the encounter. Or
Silly
potential
traps.
encounter.
Silly traps.
And it blew up in my face. But it was really exciting to get to make the plan and to attempt to execute it with the players and see what chaos ensued from failing that role.
Well, and see that's one of the other things. Like, it's a conversation I just had with one of my buddies, Jeff. And so a lot of times, what happens in a game like D&D is you roll your die to decide to see if you succeed or you fail. But in reality, if you succeed, something happens, right? I'm the rogue. I'm going to do a roguey thing. I'm going to jump across the room with my boots of striding and springing and, do a somersault and, grab the scorpions and then throw them on the demon. For example, just for example. Yeah. Well, if you roll and you fuck it up, a lot of times what happens in D&D is, oh, you fail, nothing happens. Or, yeah, you jump, you break your neck. Okay, next person's turn. So there's this feeling of waste. Like, man, I've been waiting for my turn.
It doesn't connect to the narrative in any way that rewards you for trying.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things, for example, that DreadLore does do. It's not about do you succeed or fail. It's about what do you do and how do you do it. So if you succeed, to what degree and what happens. If you fail, to what degree and what happens, the story moves forward. And a lot of times I find myself pulling that mentality as a storyteller into other games, such as D&D.
I think it's really beneficial, though, because as you've started to shift how you run games, it's been noticeable from the standpoint of somebody who's attempting to learn DreadLore. And I feel like I am playing more as a player who thinks in, the DreadLore mindset, if you will. As in, I am less timid on using my character. I'm more willing to try and see what the parameters of, well, this isn't a mechanic or a skill that I have necessarily, but it fits within the narrative of what's going on. It can potentially further the story and benefit the players. It could add a cool function to whatever plan that you have for the end result of that encounter. And rather than going, oh, this is the wrong game for that, I'm like, this is something that could make everyone more engaged in the storyline. It's worth at least trying to do it. And I feel like as a group, we're all starting to do that. And it's making the games a lot more engaging for all of us. Like, we'll get lost in the game until right before this live stream is supposed to start. And that's half the reason that they're late.
Real quick. Megan, we are paying attention to your messages. We're just waiting for a moment.
I'm sorry, I can't read.
No, it's okay. We're just waiting for a moment to actually address them. Yeah. And that's right now.
Try to hold him to it.
So, would you like to read? Would you like to read them messages? Read them out loud.
Read them all?
Yeah, read them all.
Okay, we got preach it. Awesome to have fresh meat. I love the puzzles in Zelda.
I think that's you. You're the fresh meat.
Oh, I'm the fresh meat.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'd say so.
I do have fresh hair, so I'm going to say that's fresh meat. Yes, honey. D&D was definitely before that. Yeah, so D&D, and you and I have talked about that, came out of the World War II strategery games. And then I feel like a lot of video games in particular, probably also tabletop, but I'm not as experienced in that, so I won't talk for it. They built off of what was already working, like what people were already playing, spending money on. And so a lot of games these days have the echoes of both D&D and those World War II games, just as a result of, well, that's what was selling, that's what worked. So, yeah, D&D is definitely
a lot of the franchises that people think of as, oh, that fantasy franchise. For example,
Blizzard was built off of D&D.
I mean, Blizzard, Forgotten Realms, all these things, like, because you'd read the Drizzt books.
Oh yeah, are they called the Forgotten Realms?
Forgotten Realms.
Yeah.
And when she first started in D&D or playing in this game, she was like, "Oh, I don't know much about the world." And I was like, "Dude, you've read all the Drizzt books in Forgotten Realms, right?" She was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "That's D&D."
Yeah, and World of Warcraft. I've played World of Warcraft for 15 years now, and the mechanics, the archetypes, some of the lore.
Backstab instead of sneak attack.
I mean, but the World of Warcraft is very transparent on the creators of that game being inspired to create it based off of their D&D games. So yeah. Anyway, sorry, I went off on a tangent there. RPing is how you gain XP in my game. Hell yeah, honey. Can we curse?
Yeah, we curse all the time.
Yes, riddles, mysterious things, and puzzles so you can scratch that strategic itch. Planning things, Ocean's 11 style. That's something we need to rewatch. Also, strong narrative choices are what I like best in game. Agreed. I feel like strong narrative choices can lead to really cool strategy and encounters and all that good stuff. Like, it just helps further the game. It gives it substance rather than it being just empty, cold mechanics.
Right.
You know?
Hey, I'm the rogue, I do the thing. We keep on talking about the rogue. Hey, I'm the wizard, I do the thing.
Yeah.
You know?
I'm the bard,
And, there's a whole other live stream game talk about, or there should be, about just because your character would do something doesn't mean that's good RP. By the way. For example, I'm playing the assassin who's neutral evil. That does not mean that I steal everything from my party. And if they insult me, which they will, I stab them in their sleep on the watch. Because there's a point where it's going against, like, it's shitting in everyone's Cheerios.
Yeah.
Right? Like, don't play a character that sucks for the game.
And for the people you have to actually play with, especially if it's not a one-shot. Maybe a one-shot you can get away with it.
Sure.
But if it's an actual campaign, then it's probably not the best idea. Like, I'm a drow, I'm a rogue, I'm an assassin, but I am chaotic neutral, I think, which is unusual for drow with especially that particular archetype. But I did that because I wanted to be a character who wouldn't shit in everybody's Cheerios. I wanted to have that, well, I can go either way. I wanted to be able to play both sides of it. That way...
This is really the problem with alignments.
Yeah,
but
true. It can kind of hold you to
your class is not your character. Boom. So the other rogue-type character who is having... Chris, his character name is Dav. Dav was having Poe, the actual arcane trickster rogue guy, identify this dagger. Well, Dav, his class is like fighter level 6 or something or whatever, but he's playing a rogue. His whole thing is he's this master thief who's kind of the muscle, right? But he's not playing, I'm the fighter, I'll get out there. No, he's playing someone who can fight, right?
Actually didn't even know he was a fighter.
Yeah,
I thought he was a rogue.
Right, exactly. So, it's like, Megan said, your alignment's not your character, your race is not your character. Those are just flavors. Those are things that you can delve into. Oh, you're a dwarf. So, you probably need to read up on what the dwarves are in D&D or in the world that you're in. And what are the kinds of things what are their predilections and the kinds of things they do. But D&D is directly taken from Tolkien's, Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
So the dwarves are the dwarves there. And you look at Gimli. Is Gimli super fucking greedy? No, he's not. Does he care about his friends? Yes, because he's a deep character, right?
Right.
So what are his actual, class levels? You can make an argument for many things.
Yeah, and even the dwarves that you could consider as greedy, they still have enough dimension to them that you can make a case either way, like Thorin Oakenshield. Technically greedy about the Arkenstone, about regaining his, home and whatnot, but it's not one-dimensional. You can still make an argument for, well, this is why he wants that so badly, this is why he's not willing to compromise. It adds to the dimension of the character rather than railroading what he is going to do in the game.
Right.
You can always make an argument for it.
And to get away from the Hobbit movies, because I didn't really like them, but I did just finish The Hobbit, the book.
The book.
The idea that in those stories, in those movies even, what's the coolest part? Like when it really comes down to it, what do you remember? Sure, the Balrog, coming out, Balrog of Morgoth, right? But what you remember is, you shall not pass. Talking. And then Gandalf, boom, does his thing, and then he falls. Like, you remember, that's Gandalf rolling a 1 on his dex save. He falls to his death, or eventual death. Technically he falls a really long time and then dies later. But, I know, because technically the Balrog, whatever. My point is, what you remember in the game is not what you remember of the story. Yes, there's the combats, but the combats are really, it's everything leading up to the combat, and then everything leading away from the combat. The combats themselves, while visually stimulating and cool, if that was the entire movie, The Hobbit, then it just becomes kind of boring to watch. Right. What I want to know is, why are they there? What are they doing? What are they willing to sacrifice? Yeah. What do they do when the odds are against them?
Well, I mean, the battle's not important unless you have a multi-dimensional character that you've built.
Right.
You've got to have a reason as to, well, why should I care about what's happening? And like Megan says, you remember the fumble, so having playing to your flaws is not a bad thing at all to do. And I think we're starting to finally get into that in D&D as well, especially in this session today.
The rules can really get in the way of a mechanical strategic system like that. And the same thing for Vampire, which I know you haven't played. But Vampire is such a rich, especially Vampire the Masquerade, it's such a rich lore. It's so good. I would pit Vampire the Masquerade's lore right here, and then 2nd edition D&D's Planescape right there. Like, they're pretty fucking close, in my mind, just my opinion. It's so rich, this lore of Vampire. And then you play with the mechanics. Like, playing, it's like, oh, we're talking, and I've got these character traits, not to pull DreadLore stuff out, but I've got these character traits, and this is what my character's doing, and technically, he's got the mind powers, and she's got the whatever, and we have this whole ambiance. Oh, you have to roll dice. Okay. I fall off the hill and I break my body in half because that's what the dice say. Well, that sucks. But I thought my guy was a badass. It says badass, but I fumbled the roll, so I guess I'm not a badass. The problem is, yes, you can roll, and you can roll poorly. The problem is, when do you roll?
When you're thrown down.
You roll when you're trying to do something. Well, what kind of thing are you trying to do? If you're a rogue, probably something rogue-like. If you're a fighter, probably something fighter-like. Which means the only time you're rolling is the time you're supposed to be able to do a thing.
Right.
Which means the only time you fail is when you're supposed to be good at it.
Well, two things, though. Even a badass can fumble.
Yes.
And as Megan says, it's kind of... It helps build the story. Like, some of our biggest fumbles in the game are the ones that we end up eventually laughing about. Like pulling off the curtain of black pudding and all that good stuff. Like, the fumbles are... Yeah, we can come back to that.
Yeah.
We'll circle around.
There's a trap.
Yeah, the fumbles can add a lot of good lore to the game.
Oftentimes, they're, like Megan said, they're the thing you remember.
Yeah, agreed. And it's kind of like a team bonding thing to screw up together. And
screw
also...
up through the dungeon.
Screw up through the dungeon.
And live, kind of.
Yeah, almost.
Yeah.
And also, I feel like, especially in this campaign, it takes a very Pirates of the Caribbean approach. The rules are just guidelines. And if there's something that makes more sense than the mechanic, oftentimes you'll think it over and see if it suits the goal of where you're trying to get us, if it works in the context of the experience and the combat and whatever. But if we suggest something that is outside of the realm of pure D&D or the pure mechanics, but we can make a good argument for it, then there's no shame in saying, well, that rule, we're just going to use it as a guideline. This furthers our intentions far better than what we could have done with just straight mechanics. Let's do that. We'll pick up the mechanics afterwards and see where that leads us. You don't want to feel like you're having to think inside of a box just because you've got these sets of rules. They can really just help. Okay, this is the outline we're supposed to follow. This helps us run the game. This helps the DM have a structure. This helps the players know kind of what to expect. But ideas are still welcome at the table. And if they make sense from either the DM or the players, well, let's discuss it and see if it makes the game more exciting to play, more dynamic.
Right.
And obviously I'm very biased because I've only played DreadLore and
D&D.
2 D&D games. I've done a couple one-shots with different DMs, but not a long-standing campaign. But having that dynamic storyline that gives you that freedom to kind of figure out outside the boundaries of D&D what to do and see how to fit it inside of that is pretty refreshing.
So, that's a point. People will run these games in a whole spectrum of ways. And I've mentioned this before on other GameTalk episodes, where my particular style of running is like the Pirates of the Caribbean. These are rulings, they're suggestions, they're not rules. And some players fucking hate that.
And that's okay.
Some want, look, the spell says this is what my character can do. I'm going to move a 5-foot step for those 3/5 players. I'm going to get that bonus, and this is how I attack. Boom. And it's more of the strategy game.
Yeah.
Whereas my persuasion is much more, I don't care about the combat. The combat for me is...
the cherry on top.
It's the cherry on top.
Yeah.
There's going to be a point where you're in a very dangerous place, so there's going to be combat.
Mm-hmm.
But you avoiding that combat is just the same as going straight in, bulldozing, or using subterfuge or backstabbing or whatever it is you want to do.
Yeah, avoiding the combat also requires far more teamwork and role play, if you will, than going straight into the combat. And not everybody likes that. Some people are in it for the combat, which is absolutely fine.
Yeah, flavor text, exactly.
Flavor text. Did you see what she wrote before that?
Let me see.
Maybe an antagonist actually becomes an enemy due to a player. I'm on a high horse about that right now, Megan, so thank you for saying that.
So there's an NPC that they ran into, a non-player character, named Mellowell, like Mellow Yellow. And she...
Or a Murloc. Yeah.
So for Megan, you'll get this trope. The idea of...
I was nice to her.
The idea of the players coming across the other players, right? So the players coming across the other adventuring party. The one that had gone into the dungeon before them that had narrowly escaped, most of them hadn't. And there's the one who's left, who's outside the dungeon, starving.
And distraught and, yeah.
Feeling like a coward because she ran away. And she's desperately trying to get back in to see if she can save, any of her party.
Yeah.
Half of the players kind of like were on board with her. The other half were like, oh, you attacked us because of a misunderstanding. We're going to kill you. And so this NPC was with the party for a while. And there's this crucial moment where so many things had happened narratively to where that NPC, Melolel, decided to abandon the party.
It also helped that the characters that were for her were absent from that game.
Right.
We were willingly NPC'd.
Yeah.
Which is, I feel like, an important note.
I'm going to get some water.